All right, is everyone ready for our final session of the day? We have 45 minutes left. It's my pleasure to introduce Jed Sundwall, the Open Data Global Lead for Amazon Web Services. So Jed leads the Global Open Data Program for AWS, which researches ways the AWS cloud can make data easier to discover, access, and use. The AWS Open Data Program has democratized access to petabytes of data, including satellite imagery, genomic data, and data used for natural language processing. Jed, will you please join me on stage?
What an honor. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, okay, this thing is on. I've got my clicker here. Okay, so hello, everybody. It's really great to be here. Seattle's so beautiful this time of year. This is such a dark room right now, but it'll be sunny for a long time after, so you'll get to enjoy Seattle a little bit more. So like Doug said, I run the Open Data Program at AWS, and I'm not going to talk very much. I just want to talk a little bit about the program before we go into our conversation, but just explain what we do and why we do it. So our job is basically to democratize access to data. We want to make data more accessible to more people, and for a variety of reasons, which I'll explain a little bit more. But one of the reasons is that we all know, I think we can all agree, this is not a controversial statement, that data science is becoming increasingly important in the world, just for the workforce, for people to be able to get jobs, and then also for organizations to be able to accomplish their missions. You have to be able to understand how to gather data and how to work with it to be able to derive insights to make decisions. And so making data more accessible enables more people to learn. Giving people access to real data gives them chances to experiment with new techniques and have real data to work with when learning data science. And this is good for our business as well, obviously. When data is made available in the cloud, it attracts people to AWS, and it can lower the cost of doing research, which keeps our customers happy. I'm going to share a couple quotes that explain why we do this as well, and that helps sort of frame the way that we approach sharing data and working with data in the cloud. This first quote is from Bill Joy. He was the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, and he said this in relation to open source software. He said, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. And what he was saying there was that if you can open up the code that you're working on and actually make it accessible to more people, you get access to more smarter people out there in the world. And this is definitely borne out for successful open source projects, where we have software that's open source, the source code is shared. If there are bugs, you can work with smart people from anywhere in the world to be able to fix those bugs, or if you want a new feature, you can work with smart people from anywhere in the world to add those features. And it's remarkably effective for software. But we also think that this, we think this is almost certainly true for any organization. And the same logic applies to data. So if you have data that you can open up, you can get more insights from it by making it accessible to more people. Because the greater access that you make for that data, you're going to get more people looking at it from different angles, with different problems, with different approaches and different techniques, and they're going to be able to derive more value out of the data and put it to work. The other quote that I want to share really explains some of the value that AWS brings to this, to sharing data, this comes from a book called Data Driven. It was by a guy named DJ Patil and Hillary Mason, and a woman named Hillary Mason. This book, last time I checked, Data Driven is free on the Kindle. It's a really good book. I recommend anybody here who's interested in creating a data-driven organization to check it out. It's not a long read. And one thing I love about the book, though, is that they included this line that says, cleaning data is often the most taxing part of data science and is frequently 80% of the work. So this 80% figure, I'm almost certain, has not been scientifically proven. This is not real data here. But what was nice about Patil and Mason when they wrote this book is that they put it in a real book so I could quote it and present it as though it were a fact. And but the truth is, I think anytime I share this figure, I see a lot of nodding heads. Anybody who's worked with data has had this experience where you do a ton of work just to get data into a place where you can just analyze it for the first time. A friend of mine once said, he said, open data is great until you download your first zip file. Then you open up the zip file and you're like, what am I looking at? So this 80% that goes, 80% of your time going into just getting data into a place where you can use it, we actually have a saying for this at Amazon, and so this is what I'll leave you with today in terms of an idea to frame this conversation, which is undifferentiated heavy lifting. At AWS, and I think Amazon broadly, we're always looking at our customers' lives and the work they're trying to do and trying to find out what are the chores that they have to do that are keeping them from doing what they actually want to do, from what actually differentiates them and from what they're good at. And can we take that away from them so that they don't have to do those things? And what we focus on in the Open Data program is figuring out how can you make data available in a way so that it's analysis ready and so that people can approach it with varying degrees of expertise and start working with it and learning from it. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with two graphs, and this will set the stage for our discussion about how to actually make data available for an organization. And these are very simple graphs. Okay, again, there's no real science behind these ones. But one thing that we found is that in many instances, when people work with data, they think of the end result that they want, the end result tool or visualization that they want. And you go from what you're seeing here is this kind of the 80% of that work, working with data, taking it from a raw state, and then taking it to a place where you can actually understand it, you have an insight you can work with. What happens throughout this process is that you start limiting the value of the data, right? So think of it this way. If you have a raw spreadsheet that just has thousands of rows, that might be really intimidating for some people. They might not know how to work with it. But on the other end of the graph, you have the highly processed sort of like final analysis of the data set. In this case, it could just be a visualization. And if you give somebody that visualization, they're like, wow, this visualization is really interesting. It tells me something about the data, but I want to be able to see the underlying data. It's almost, I want to run my own experiments and create my own visualizations. And if you do that, then you've limited the value of the data because instead of giving people the data, you've just given them the answer. And what we try to find is this sort of sweet spot in the middle where data is made available in a way that's accessible and documented and trustworthy. And if you can make it available in a way that people can get to it, they can understand what they're working with it, and they can rely on it being accurate, then they can make their own decisions about how to visualize it or what other tools and services to build upon it. And we're starting to see this a lot, especially as people start working with the cloud and making much larger volumes of data available in a cloud environment, because it allows people to make data available either internally or externally to a lot of stakeholders, and then let those stakeholders or those people who want to work with the data bring whatever computing resources or whatever tools they want to work with the data and derive whatever value they want out of it. And so, I'm gonna close with that, and we're gonna have a much broader conversation now about how to work with data in an enterprise and in a nonprofit organization and apply data to accomplish your mission. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mark Lehhmann from Global Citizen, and then Justin Rupp from Global Giving to the stage, and we're gonna have a discussion about working with data to accomplish your mission unofficially in a post-GDPR world, but that's one thing we want to talk about. So, welcome to the stage. We should give these guys a hand. Yeah. So before we start, do you want to introduce yourselves and your organizations? Sure.
Okay, I'll start with myself.
Yeah.
I'm Mark Lehhmann. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Global Citizen, and we're the advocacy action-based organization who's basically creating a movement to end extreme global poverty by 2030.
Cool. Great. I'm Justin Rupp. I'm the Senior Systems Ninja at Global Giving. And Global Giving is sort of a marketplace to connect donors with organizations all around the world and connect them so that they can get back information about when they donate to them, what's being done with that, and give them trust in what's happening.
So before I'll have some specific questions about your organizations and how you're using data in your organizations. But I think this discussion was it's about the data revolution, and I want to give you each a chance to talk about your thoughts on this. Is there even a data revolution? And is today really different than previous times that you've been working in your organizations and working with data? I will go in the same order.
Okay. Is there a data revolution? I think there is not so much a data revolution, but I think there's definitely an information revolution. So pretty much everybody and their cousin and their dog are thinking that they need to just dam up huge amounts of data just in case the executive team asks them what are they doing about big data. But is there really something to be done with it? And actually, I've given that a lot of thought because just the sheer weight of data that's out there today and what's really usable or not it's the sort of signal to noise ratio. Mm-hmm. And pretty much for many years already, a lot of organizations have made a great deal of value out of the signal part of it and discarded the noise. But now what's happening is organizations are munging the noise and trying to monetize that. It's almost like in the sort of early 1800s where they threw lobsters away because it was trash. Then they realized afterwards, oh, there's money to be made out of this. And so, of course, crustaceans found their way onto tables. Right. So it's exactly the same thing.
It's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, with data today. Yeah. And the other big thing, the difference between, let's say, today and just a few years ago is just the total abandonment with which people are willing to give up their private data. Right. And unfortunately, the innocence with which people just look at this sea of data, which is mainly opinion, and then accept that as fact. So that's the sort of ugly, dirty sea of data. But then I think the big difference for me today in the information age are the sort of the new technologies like MapReduce, the good technologies, the excellent books which one can use to really sort of get an understanding of what information is as applied to data, but then actually munge that, get meaningful out of it, and actually just deal with the, as you said already, the petabytes of information that are out there.
Thank you. Cool.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. There's a lot of junk that people hold on to because you don't know if somebody's going to ask about it, or you yourself even go, well, will I need this one day? And I definitely think there is some sort of revolution, especially around the cost to analyze that data and acquire it has gone way down, and the tools to do it have become easier to use. So a lot more people can sort of just acquire a huge amount of data very cheaply. And it used to be in the past that even if you did keep a whole bunch of data, getting answers out of it was harder, it took longer, or it cost a lot more money. And it was expensive to ask the wrong questions out of your data. You needed to know what you wanted out of it and ask the right question, because after you spent all the money to get the answer, if you found out that was the wrong question, now where are you? But now that it's cheaper, you can sort of iterate more to find the correct data out of all of the chaff that's in there. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think that's true. And in terms of personal data, I hope that people are more aware that they're doing that, especially a lot of breaches that have happened, that people are more aware they need to kind of keep some of that more secure. But you're right, a lot of people just kind of hand it out to whoever. Yeah.
I actually really like the thought that you're mentioning on the amount of effort it takes, mm-hmm. because that's a big thing with data science as well, Jed, and I think you've seen that most probably too. Organizations look for the wrong things, or they look for the wrong answers, and sometimes statistical questions, let's say if you do it to the 4th decimal place, are relatively simple. Mm-hmm. Adding an extra just 1 decimal place can hugely complicate the process, can add many cycles onto it, maybe even days of processing just for 1 decimal place. And is it really valuable,
right,
given the question?
Right, absolutely. But at least people can iterate quickly, but though you're right, if you add a certain thing, it can massively balloon what you're doing. Not as much as before, though. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's actually, it's one way that we characterize what we're trying to do is lowering the cost of asking questions, right? So a lot of researchers have questions, or people in an organization might have a question. And yeah, previously the first step was like, well, we've got to buy another supercomputer. So like, I guess I won't ask that question today, but now you don't have to worry about that stuff. So I'm going to sort of skip ahead a little bit, because we have started talking about personal data already, and GDPR is a thing. I'm sure you're both running global organizations, so this is affecting you. What data are you afraid of dealing with right now? Is there
is there stuff that you're actively avoiding in your operations? We can reverse the order.
Sure. I actually don't think there's, well, I don't think there's any bad data that you don't want. I think that what I'm afraid of, I'm not afraid of data. I'm afraid of bad insights coming out of that. Yeah, exactly. I'm afraid of bad insights coming from that data. So you can have a good algorithm, or a well-written algorithm is maybe a better word this way, that can weed out your bad data, or at least make it so its effect on your outcome is negligible. But if you don't have a good algorithm, or you aren't asking the right question, then you're going to get the wrong insights out of it, and then you're going to probably make decisions that are bad for your organization or bad for what you're trying to do. So what I'm afraid of is getting the wrong insight out of the data, not the data that it sort of started with. And I'm super afraid of making a decision based on that negatively impacts people's lives. When you're in this sector and you're trying to do good, if you look at your data to decide what to do and you end up you could end up coming out doing neutral, but I'm really afraid of you do something that makes things worse.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm actually going to agree with that too. I'm not scared of any data, but I think I can turn it around and ask what are typical organizations scared of? And interestingly enough, it's the unvarnished truth. Because many executive teams come with a set of data and preconceived conclusions, and they want you to prove that their conclusions are correct. No, the data doesn't lie. If the data says X, it is X, and that to me is the real worry. They mustn't use data to try and prove something which is not true.
Right. Yeah. There's a trend now which is a very positive trend in data-based policymaking. So you create policy based on data, but it has its corollary, which is policy-based data making, where you're like, well, we have this conclusion that we've already come to, and we'd like you to, use the data to back it up, right? Okay. So I want to dig a little bit deeper though on this, though. I mean, in terms of personal data, well, we'll do it this way. You work in, obviously you work with a lot of individuals and charities that really touch people's lives. First, I mean, let's take some time to talk, like, how does data help you accomplish your mission? And then I'm going to come back to the GDPR question and personal information and how you guys handle it. So.
Okay. So Global Citizen is really working with, millions of persons. We're serving up content to them. We're trying to understand what motivates people to do things. We're trying to understand why they, let's say, take certain actions, what their motivation is. And we've seen, for instance, when it comes to, you can almost say, munging large amounts of data and getting people to act on it. There are organizations, they're going to stay unnamed in this room, but there are organizations that have solved this problem of data and motivation at scale. But unfortunately, their solutions have been worse than the actual original problem. And so, of course, the fallout from this over the last couple of months will continue over the most probably coming months and maybe even over the next years as they try and sort of make out that that wasn't the original modus operandi, but we all know that it is the case. So myself and my team have been giving a lot of thought to, for instance, Hebbian and gradient descent technologies with neural networks to understand what is clicktivism, what is motivation, and then trying to sort of reach into people's psyche and their behavior to understand or engage with empathy, not just what's the reward or how can I just get something done or click, 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 but get persons to actually think through and realize that they are members of the world, that they have a responsibility to a lot of other people other than just themselves or their immediate relatives. So this, for me, is the big thing, and it's almost going back to the drawing board because, as we said, organizations have solved some of this, but the way they've done it has just been very, very bad, very unethical, and that sort of worries me in that data can be used for that or the good.
Fascinating.
Cool. So data is really to the core of what Global Giving does. We have a core value at Global Giving: listen, act, learn, repeat. So we're always looking for data and insights in that data that will help us sort of do more and be better at what we're doing. So that's how it's basically really good to our own mission. And then the nonprofits that we work with all around the world, we're trying to help them do better, to have more impact on the ground where they are. So we apply that same principle to them, that they need to be listening in their own communities and therefore collecting that feedback. And then based on that, take actions, and they'll get data back from those actions, and then learn from the data and any mistakes or things that happen, and then repeat that whole process. So there's a lot of data collection in that is just super important to us.
So now, and then in both cases, you're collecting a lot of information about individuals and perhaps their beliefs and interests and motivations and things like that, obviously. What do you do to safeguard that and protect that? Is there anything that you would want to share with the room?
So certainly we try to not collect things that, sort of to an earlier point, that we don't need. We're not going to do something with. We don't need to be collecting all of this data about people and beneficiaries of work that's being done that doesn't matter, and then we just have to work on securing it. Beyond that, the data that we do have, you do everything you can to keep it secure. You follow best practices like keeping it encrypted at rest and transit. You have least access privileges for who in your organization can access that data. You make sure that they're using two-factor authentication for accessing any of those systems. Anywhere that data is stored, if it's important data like that, then it's not directly connected to the internet. We're doing all those things, and those are important for basically everyone to do. If you've got either personal information on people that you work with, or data that is, I would say, maybe like a differentiator of how your organization is from another one in the sector or in the same area of focus. That's stuff that you would want to keep close to the vest, and you got to lock it away somehow.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good point. And it's funny because I really care deeply about what you're trying to do, Jed, with open data, because it's very, very important. It gives me mind to sort of think more about the way, it's almost how many doors do you open to data where now it actually becomes more of a risk. And so you've got to look at that risk profile, and I know you guys are all on top of this type of thing. But for me, I'm most probably from the global citizen standpoint, we would share any aggregated data, in other words, that can't be defined or tied to a specific individual. But as soon as you're getting sort of personal data, you need to know that if it's been breached, where it's been breached, and if there are more holders of the data, then it makes it that much more difficult. So I'm mindful of that. And the other thing I'm very, very mindful of is even if governments, for that matter, or large organizations promise us that we will care for your data, I really, that's a grain of salt in my book. Because the thing is, you just need a powerful lobby group to say, hey, we can monetize this. Governments will immediately just renege on their promise. Organizations will. They will sell your data. They will do whatever it takes. You just have to look at net neutrality. You just have to look at climate change to realize that these are huge things which affect people. So anybody who's willing to give up things that are of deep concern to them as people to the whim of an organization, it's not a wise move.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's interesting. I mean, I think both your comments remind me that as GDPR came about, and we with my program, we also had to address GDPR issues, and we realized look, this is just codifying a lot of stuff that people should have been doing in the first place, right? So it wasn't a huge deal for us. But it's good that I think what's going on right now is that a lot of people have been shocked into being suddenly thoughtful about data, which they should have been thoughtful about the data in the first place. So what do you wish everybody in your organization understood about data and what's possible with it?
Me?
Did you go?
Whoever wants to go.
I can't remember.
Is it all me now? Oh my God.
Yeah,
The weight of this responsibility.
Set the tone.
No, so yes, I think we've touched on it a little bit already, and that is that there's a distinct difference between data and information. I think if people understand that, that would be great. Data is unchangeable, but information has basically got a half-life. And when I think about that, it literally goes back, for instance, if you had all the data on the manure in Manhattan during the 17th century from the horses, wonderful information even at that stage. But with the advent of the motor vehicle now, it's just no longer relevant.
Right.
So the point is, with exponential change, exponential technology, our understanding of data and information is even changing so rapidly today. Just damming up huge amounts of data, unless there's really good reason for it, is, first of all, crazy, but then just wasting a lot of resources. But I think a lot more comes down to our perception of it and what we're trying to do with it. So if organizations and our teams understand that there's this big difference and they're willing to talk about it, I think that's a great first step.
All right. Cool. Thinking about what the people in my organization, or maybe even everyone here, should think about data. I'll go back to my point about information and data that differentiates your organization. Things that is intellectual property, is I guess how a large corporation would refer to it. That information, everyone in my organization hopefully and should know that that's the kind of thing you want to keep secret. You don't need to be sharing that with anybody. But beyond that, I think that there is certainly really good usefulness to having like the aggregated data, to sharing that with other orgs, to helping them understand things, and maybe they can come up with better insight. There's certainly insight to sharing some of that with even donors and beneficiaries to sort of know what's going on, as long as it's anonymized and sort of brought together. And I know that you were sharing that people want to see the data behind things, and there's just a certain level at which either that data is sensitive and you don't want to show it to them, or it's what makes you special, and you're doing all that work, so you don't need to share that. But I also recognize there's a lot of small orgs out there doing great work on the ground, but don't really have anything that needs to be kept sensitive. If you're out building a school, other than the standard business things of your HR data, there's no reason for you to not share everything. So.
You are touching on something that's very important. If there was a promise that the wrong people wouldn't be using that data, it would be so fantastic. And I think a lot of organizations would be prepared to do that. But then let's just go to your example. You build schools. It's the most fantastic thing. How could you be doing something better? What are you using? Bricks. The wrong people will be saying, these people need 3 billion bricks a year. Spam, use this company, undercut this company, just flood your email, flood this, flood that, and manipulate it. In the end, you say, I wish I'd never, ever shared any of this information.
That's a good point. I have told my staff, that there are kind of weird bits like that about our company's operation that you just don't share, because you end up in weird situations like that. Like if someone calls you and is just like, what brand of copier do you use? No one needs to know that.
Yeah.
But you might think to yourself, well, there's no reason that I can't tell them that. Well, there is. They're going to start trying to sell you stuff, and there are security implications to that too. Maybe the brand of copier you have has some massive vulnerability on it, and you've got it connected to the internet. You don't need to share that kind of stuff, I guess. That's sort of operational points of your business.
Sorry, Jed, we're very hyper about
No, I love it. And it's funny, they're literally I know a company that does this sort of lead generation for building contractors. They'd be like, oh, bricks?
Oh, so now my company, company goes bang now because of this?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm the open data guy. People think like, well, open data, you don't have to worry about security. Come talk to this guy, because it's a much easier conversation because you don't have to talk about security. And then, of course, I always throw a lot of cold water. I'm like, it has a lot to do with security, because you don't want to share data if you don't know that it's trustworthy, if it hasn't been securely produced and made available. So it's always complex. It's never simple.
Well, that's because you're in that role. You're like a third-party handler of that data. If my organization has data I want to share out, in theory, unless I'm doing something malicious, I know that data is trustworthy. If it's from me, if I'm the first-party source.
Right.
So it's interesting when you're trying to pass on data.
Yeah, you should be very, very careful and thoughtful about it. So I guess the one other thing I wanted to know, and I'll just go deeper on this again, within your organization and the people that you work with in your organization, what do you wish they understood about sort of the limits of what you can do with data?
The limits of what you can do with data. I mean, the sky's the limit, right?
Okay, so you're
no, no. I mean, it depends on what you have.
Yeah.
You know, you can't squeeze water from a rock. I mean, I guess you can, but you know that sort of same thing. You know, if you don't have something that's got what you want to get out of it, it doesn't matter how many ways you stir that pot, you're never going to get that stuff out of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly a limit. But then I feel like that feeds into that thought of, well, I need everything then, because how am I going to get the insights I want unless I have everything? And so you have to know. Think about what your business, what your organization actually does and what it's ever going to need.
Right.
And then make sure you're keeping things that are useful to that. But, yeah.
So actually, you've both commented on this, and I think it's really interesting because we encountered this as well in our program. So you don't need all of the data. So how do you explain that to people? You're like, you know what, we're not going to store certain kinds of data. Is that you had to have this difficult conversation with people already?
Yes, and the thing is, it was even before GDPR came along, and the thing is, as the world changes, there's going to be new laws, there's going to be different rules, etc. And so my approach has always been, what's the strictest current law in place? Then hold to that, because the thing is, that way, you're not going to be caught out. If the law changes and you have to become more strict, now you can excise data and you can take it out. But if you sort of always under the radar with the lowest form, you're going to be constantly open to scrutiny and also creating problems and mistrust and all the things that go along with it. So that's the way I handle it. And the thing is too, even if data could give us a little bit more insight, but we sort of like walking on the line of how would I feel if that data about not just myself, but everybody was available? So let's say I've got a family and I've got 2 daughters and a son and wife and extended family.
Is that true?
How would I feel if their personal data, let's say my daughters are like 9 years old and 12 years old. Okay, so GDPR says, and these other laws, not up to a certain age. But what changes about a person between the age of 18 and 21, 21 to 30? Does it make them more vulnerable? Or is it the case that you should be bright enough to realize that you shouldn't have that you should have the latest, let's say, fixes and patches on your machines and your mobile so that you don't get exploited because now you're old enough? If we can exploit you, we're going to do so. To me, the laws are actually, they need to be really looked at very, very strictly. And I think as a technical officer and yourself, where we are in a situation where data comes under our purview, we have accountability and responsibility, not just to ourselves and our organization, but to people in general, to be respectful of data, to be respectful of the individual. And I think if we are driven by that and not just by greed and motivation and making money, that starts changing our perception of information and data.
Right.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I don't know what else to say about that, but that's perfect.
So would it be fair to summarize your position? I mean, you're inherently conservative when it comes to this kind of thing. You want to be conservative with the data, and you also assume that the regulations are going to become stricter over time.
I hope they do, yes.
Yeah.
One never knows. With the way lobbyists work and the way governments and organizations work, if there's a fast buck to be made, they're going to do it.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Especially on the age thing, what I was thinking was, like you would hope people would get to a certain maturity level, but we know that age doesn't make you more sensitive to your data. And then, if you go to the further extreme, I'm not certain that my grandmother keeps all of her phone patched and her laptop patched well, So, when I go visit her, I make sure that's taken care of. But so
It looks like Jed's graph that went like this. So in the middle, like you sort of maybe got it under control, and then it just drops off again.
Yes, and we could hope that's right, but...
well, I hope I don't go that way.
It'll be interesting to see how the coming years go. Yeah. And sort of the literacy with this sort of stuff progresses. So how do you stay sharp? Like, how do you keep ahead of trends, especially, not just in terms of policy and regulation, but just techniques and being able to keep up with technologies to work with data? Is there anything you do how do you train as Ninja? What's the title again?
Senior Systems Ninja.
Senior Systems Ninja.
Yeah.
What's the Ninja training like?
Keeping up with the latest things that are coming out, it takes a lot of time, but
Right.
sometimes you can just sort of skim what the product is before you decide if you need to bother going into it. So keeping an eye on all of the latest AWS's launches, which are...
Sorry about that, there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. Just a huge amount. Keeping up with that, for policy things, you can usually see them coming, before they pass. You can see legislation that's coming up, and you can go, well, how much work is this going to be? Are we already sort of compliant with this? Because, as we said about GDPR, it's stuff you should have probably already been doing. So sometimes it doesn't really require a lot, but yeah, definitely watching for new products. Going to these sorts of events is really useful, listening to how other people are handling their data and keeping it secure. Sometimes you hear some way that someone's doing something, you're like, oh, I could do that, and that wouldn't be much more effort to get there. And then when the regulation comes along, or it just suddenly becomes sort of an industry best practice, you're like, well, I already heard about that. Or even if you don't implement it immediately, maybe in the back of your mind you go, oh, well, I remember where that talk was. I can go back and look at the slides and look at the video and figure out how they were doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I would say from our perspective, seeing as I'm so close also to the development and engineers, for years, okay, OWASP, etc. So very security conscious when you code and engineer. But I would say over the last couple of months, I'm Global Citizen, my team has been concentrating not just on being security conscious when we develop code, but also scam conscious. And there's actually a difference, because you can be totally security conscious, but it's almost like the thinking profile of people are looking for ways to either get more out of what you're actually trying to give them, and especially in the nonprofit space,
Right.
to scam the system, or to, okay, take an action. If you take an action, you get this reward. Wow, that means if I can take 100 actions, I can get 10 of those rewards. What happens if I do 100,000? Maybe I can write a little bot quickly and just whack the system almost like a DDoS, and then maybe I can get 1,000 of these rewards. And the strangest people do the strangest things. So the thing is, you've almost got to now start thinking in this mindset, what can I do to engineer the system in such a way that it has to behave in only a way that a person can be interacting with it, and not a machine and not a bot? Right. How do I work things so that you can only use one account once, one Twitter account, one of these, one of those? How do you just keep closing all the doors behind you when things happen? And that sort of mindset is what I'm trying to get into my engineering team at the moment.
It's hard to convey that, though. It's not, so when Jed asked me the question, it's hard to teach certain things. It's just experience over time.
Or cynicism.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, I think there's room for that.
Healthy dose.
Especially if you're talking about security. I mean, you have to be very, very...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think cynicism is probably the right word. It's applied cynicism. It's not a bad thing. So, but you say that it's hard to teach this. I mean, what is it that what are the sort of fundamentals that you look for in people on your team that are working with and securing your data? I mean, if you can't teach it, when you're hiring somebody, what are you looking for?
People who quickly learn from mistakes or things that have happened in the past. So, if you have experience over time and you've dealt with a certain problem, the fact that you can know to sort of jump past that very quickly. Okay, this is what happened last time. I don't need to make that happen again. Or I can see what the next step will be because of that problem. So people can sort of think quickly on their feet and just have things to reference back on. It's very strange. It's like I've been asked how you debug a problem, and it's you can write out steps, but sometimes it's really about what you've done in the past, and you go, well, okay, I can do step 1, but based on the outcome of that, I'm just going to skip 10 steps, and it's hard to teach that.
Yeah,
it's very.
That's great. You've covered, those are great thoughts from an engineering perspective. I tend to look at this, Jed, from the point of view of being mission-oriented. So to me, any nonprofit and any organization for that matter should have a very strong idea and feeling about their core mission. And if you hire persons and the persons that you are hiring, you make sure that they are really in tune with the mission, they should automatically think about things like that.
Right.
And so you can always teach a person good engineering practices, but you can't teach a person those core mission principles that should really come from here.
Right.
The engineering comes from the head, but mission comes from the heart. And if they don't have that, they might be fantastic engineers, but I would prefer that they worked somewhere else.
Right. I'm glad you both answered that question correctly. There was there were right answers to this one, and
The wrong answers too.
well, because I think they aren't technical things. It's an ability to learn. It's a focus on mission. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately what we see, what I experience over and over again, is that the value that comes out of data is what humans bring to it, from their own curiosity, from their own interest in learning, their own interest in trying to accomplish a mission. And so, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today and how you're working with data and spending the afternoon with us.
Thanks you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Then